Today is 5th of May 2025. Yesterday I talked about kilesa, defilements. I talked the meanings of defilements, then the varieties of kilesas. I talk even I explain even there are 1,500 kilesas. So mainly yesterday I talked about the defilements. Those defilements can be summarized into three types: coarse, medium, and subtle. The coarse type of kilesa defilement is known as Vitikama kilesa in Pali, transgressive kilesa. When you break 5 precepts and when you commit killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, and taking intoxicants, at that time transgressive kilesas are present. Because of that transgressive kilesa, you commit those unwholesome actions, cruel, rude type of misconducts. So in this way, transgressive kilesa commit the unwholesome actions bodily and verbally. So this is the coarse one. Second is pariyuttana kilesa in Pali, obsessive defilements. You may not be committing body outwardly by body and speech, but mentally still you might wish to kill, steal, commit sexual misconduct, lying, abusing, taking intoxicant, and so on. When mind is obsessed to commit these unwholesome actions or misconducts, that is, due to the presence of medium type of defilement, that is pariyuttana kilesa or obsessive kilesa. And the third one is anusaya kilesa in Pali, latent or dormant defilement, which lie hidden. We also call as embedded kilesa, lie hidden but waiting for the good condition, waiting for the good condition to emerge in our mind. When relevant good condition arise, when relevant good condition meet, then they arise and they may turn into obsessive and transgressive. So that is anusaya kilesa or latent kilesa. This embedded or latent dormant kilesa can be likened as a person who is deeply fallen asleep. When he wakes up, when he or she wakes up, his mind starts to churn. That is likely to obsessive kilesa, obsessive defilements. Thirdly, starts to involve in his or her day-to-day activities, that is likely the transgressive kilesa. A person who is fallen asleep, that is like latent kilesa, when he or she wakes up, that is like obsessive kilesa, and when he or she involves into day-to-day activities, like to transgressive kilesa. Another example is given. The phosphorus tip on the matchstick is like latent kilesa. We can't see the flame or fire until we strike on matchbox. So lie hidden. When we strike that matchstick on matchbox, then fire starts. So that is like obsessive kilesa. And the forest fire occur due to the bad handling, that is like transgressive defilement. So the kilesas that we mentioned, yesterday can be summed up into these three kinds of kilesas or defilements. Gross one or coarse, which commits bodily, verbally. The medium one, which is obsessive mentally, and the third subtle, which is embedded in our mind, waiting for the relevant condition to arise or to occur. So in this way, there are three types of defilement, and corresponding to these three types of kilesas, there are three trainings. Three trainings to subside, to eliminate, to suppress these kilesas. First is training of sila, morality. When we practice sila, you control your bodily action and verbal action. You avoid unwholesome bodily and verbal action. You avoid bodily and verbal misconducts. You restrain from unwholesome actions. And by restraining, by avoiding, you put aside the transgressive kilesa, transgressive defilement. So by practicing sila, you can put aside transgressive kilesa. Minimum 5 precepts. If you practice 5 precepts, that is quite sufficient to put aside the transgressive defilement. But here in intensive retreat, we practice 8 precepts, which is quite supportive in intensive retreat in order to improve quite fastly in meditation. So here, when you practice the 8 precepts, you put aside or you eliminate the transgressive kilesas. So practicing sila, morality, eliminates the first coarse type of defilement. To suppress the second medium type of kilesa, you need another training of concentration. Concentration practice is required. Sila, morality, cannot suppress the obsessive kilesa, because sila only controls the body and speech. It can control only body and speech. It can't control your mind. So that means it can't prevent to not to arise obsessive kilesa. So you need the another practice, that is concentration practice. Right now, by having good foundation of sila, morality, yogis are trying their best to develop concentration by development of mindfulness. When yogis develop mindfulness and mindfulness gets momentum, concentration develops. And when concentration develops, you suppress or you eliminate the second medium type of kilesa, that is obsessive. And to eliminate the third one, the latent or dormant kilesa, you need wisdom, vipassana knowledge, insight knowledge. Again, concentration cannot eliminate the third kilesa, the subtle kilesa. You need vipassana knowledge or insight knowledge. And of course, to uproot you need path and fruition knowledge. Path and fruition knowledge to uproot the latent type of kilesa. And to develop path and fruition knowledge, you have to practice vipassana meditation. There are two types of meditation. You might have heard the samatha meditation, concentration meditation, and vipassana meditation, and that is insight meditation. Concentration, samatha meditation is just to develop concentration. By practicing samatha alone, you can't develop wisdom. You can't develop wisdom. So you can't uproot practicing samatha. To uproot the kilesas, you have to practice vipassana meditation. And right now you are practicing vipassana meditation. So in this way, there are three types of defilements, and there are three trainings to eliminate those three types of kilesas, defilements. Yesterday also I mentioned, if you are not mindful even for a moment, many kilesas are likely to arise. Within a second, millions and billions of minds keep arising and passing away. So if you are not mindful, if you don't have the protection of mindfulness, then kilesas are mostly to arise in your mind stream. So to prevent the kilesas and to subside the kilesas which have already arisen, we need to be very mindful. We need much care. We need to practice respectfully so that we can prevent the kilesas to not to arise. Care and respect is needed when you practice meditation. You should not be casual. If you are casual in your practice, then you admit the kilesas. You admit the kilesas. Not only in sitting, not only in walking, but in daily activities as well. You need care and respect. Diligent practice is required. Ardent energy is required. Then you can prevent those kilesas to not to arise. So today I will talk how we can strengthen our mindfulness and concentration, or how we can develop good mindfulness and concentration, of course, energy, wisdom as well, or how we can improve in our meditation. So, to sharpen the mindfulness, concentration, wisdom, the first thing Buddha mentioned is to practice respectfully. to practice in a reverential manner. And under this topic, there are 4 points mentioned. 4 points are mentioned under this topic, practicing respectfully. They define how to practice respectfully, or how we can sharpen our mindfulness and concentration. The first one is, first I would like to recite Pali. Chakhu massa yatha andho means you have to behave as if you are blind, although you can see. This is what the first point or the first feature. Meditators should behave like a blind. Meditators should behave like a blind, although they can see. So, how to behave like a blind person? How to behave like a blind person? Here we have to understand the behavior of a blind person. A blind person is not interested with visible objects. He or she has no interest at all in visible objects. So that kind of mentality, that kind of behavior is needed. That is the meaning of behaving like a blind person. Behaving like a blind person. You should not take interest in visible objects which are around you. Just consider about a blind person. He or she has no concern or interest at all about the visible object. So he or she, in his or her mind, defilements based on the visible objects do not arise. Based on the visible objects do not arise. Similarly, yogis should not let the kilesas to arise based on the visible objects. By taking interest on visible objects, by involving in visible objects. Again, that means yogis should control their eyes. Yogis should control their eyes. They should not look here and there. That is what on the very first day, when you are given instruction, you are instructed to cast down your eyes, to restrain your eyes, to not to look here and there. Because if you look here and there, when you see pleasing visible object, greed tends to arise, and when you see unpleasing object, anger tends to arise. At least illusion, delusion, or ego belief based on the visible objects tend to arise. Means you are admitting easily the defilements. Here we are practicing meditation in order to purify our mind, so we can't easily permit the kilesas to arise. That is not the way to go. So you have to restrain. You have to restrain your eyes by casting it down, by inclining down. It doesn't ask you to keep your eyes closed during walking and while doing daily activities. In sitting meditation, we keep our eyes closed. There is no problem. When you do walking, when you do daily activities, it doesn't ask you to keep your eyes closed. Yogis should not do walking meditation by closing their eyes. Yogis may feel sometimes it is easy to concentrate when you close your eyes, but in fact not. There are many subconsciousnesses, like whether you are going to bang, whether you are going to fall, whether you are going to stop or trip. These kind of subconsciousnesses keep arising when your eyes are closed while walking. So that will not be supportive to develop good mindfulness and concentration. During walking, if you keep your eyes closed, so we don't recommend yogis to keep eyes closed when doing walking meditation and when doing other activities. You just need to restrain your eyes, not looking here and there, casting it down. That is the way to do. And by restraining, you can prevent kilesas. You can remain focused with movements of the leg during walking, and can remain focused in your day-to-day activities. Then when you have to look, there are of course moments when you have to look something. At that time, you have to again note as looking, seeing, looking, seeing. While looking something, and you see something at that time, so two things. Looking is there and seeing is there. That's why you may label as looking, seeing, looking, seeing. If you know about the object seen, you can add one more labeling as knowing. Looking, seeing, knowing. Looking, seeing, knowing. So when you have to look something, at that time also you have to note. And this is how we can restrain, you can prevent the kilesas. And this is what mentioned in this first point. Blind person, in a blind person mind, kilesas do not arise due to the visible object. Similarly, yogis should try their best to not to arise kilesas due to visible objects. Visible objects. So this is what mentioned under the topic, the first point mentioned under the topic of practicing respectfully. Again, it does mean that if you keep restraining your eyes, you are practicing respectfully, unless you are not practicing respectfully. And that means it will not help you to improve in your meditation, to develop mindfulness, to develop concentration if you keep looking here and there. Not only in the meditation hall, but when you walk to dining hall, when you walk to your room, even inside your room, you should try to restrain your eyes. Because restraining your eyes is to prevent the kilesas from the visible objects. And another thing is to develop the controlling power. Mind intends to look here and there. Our mind is fickle. Our mind is restless, so always wants to look here and there, to see something good or pleasing. So it keeps running here and there. So we need control. We need control. So by restraining your eyes, you also develop controlling power of the mind. So that's why it is very beneficial or supportive during meditation, controlling your eyes. So this is the first point. The second one, I recite again Pali, Sodava Badiro Yatha. You have to behave as if you are deaf, although you can hear. That is the second point. Again, you have to behave like a deaf person. Deaf person has no interest at all in audible objects. He has no interest, he doesn't take any interest about the audible object. Similarly, yogis should not take interest in audible objects. Of course, there are the sounds. Although you don't want to hear, you might hear those sounds. Here, that's why it means you should not prick up your ears deliberately. Intentionally, you should not prick up your ears to listen, to hear. Or you should not involve, you should not engage yourself in hearing the sounds, or whenever you hear, you should not involve. You should not chase behind those sounds, like where the sound is coming from, what they are talking, or you should not let your mind to think based on that audible object. Sounds are quite distractive at the beginning of the practice. You might have experience about this, as noise, sounds are quite distractive. Your mind can be easily distracted by sound. Even there are yogis whose mind is active in hearing. Active in hearing. So for those yogis, we recommend mostly to ignore the sound. If you are active in hearing sounds, so ignore, mostly ignore. When it is really obvious, then note hearing, and maximum 5 to 6 times. Hearing, like that. Maximum 5 to 6 times, then ignore. Then come back to your main object. Mostly you have to ignore those sounds because the more you pay attention, you may feel you are hearing more and more. Even the subtle sounds, you feel your ear is catching them, so better to ignore. Later your mind remain concentrated, you will hear less. So better to ignore those sounds if you are active in hearing. So again, if you don't behave like deaf, then when you hear pleasing sound, greed tends to arise, and when you hear unpleasing, anger tends to arise. Especially when you hear noise, anger arises. So have to behave like a deaf. You should not deliberately, intentionally engage to listen, to hear, or to involve into the sound. So this is the second one, to practice respectfully. One more thing I would like to mention regarding the first point about the visible object. It is not in fact the visible object. While sitting meditation, although you have kept your eyes closed, you might see different visions as pictures, images, colors, at times bright lights like sparks. When you see these things, again you have to just note as seeing. You don't need to think, you don't need to analyze. Even you don't need to know what picture, what image, what color, how bright. You don't need to know. You don't need to analyze, you don't need to involve. At that time also you have to just note as seeing. Again, maximum 5 to 6 times. Still there, then just ignore. Come back to your main object. Don't involve in those visible objects. If you keep curing those visible objects, then you will see more and more. So don't give much attention, don't take care much about those visions as well. So in this way, when you have to see, then you note seeing, and when again you have to hear, or when you are hearing, you have to note as hearing in order to prevent the defilements. So not giving chance defilements to arise by visible objects and by audible objects. This is again practicing respectfully. This is the second point. The third one, in Pali, Panya Vasa Yatha Mugo. Although you have lots of knowledge about practice or about Dhamma, about the Buddha's teaching, you have to behave as if you are ignorant, as if you don't know anything. Some of you might have so many knowledge about the practice because you have practiced, you have joined many retreats, or you have practiced for long term, or you might have read the Buddha's teaching, Buddha's scriptures. Therefore, you have lots of knowledge about the Dhamma, about the teachings, about the practice. But when you practice meditation, you have to behave like you don't know anything or you know less. You have to behave like ignorant. Because if you don't behave like an ignorant, if you believe yourself, you have lots of experiences, you have lots of knowledge about the Buddha's teaching, then the conceit arises. The first hindrance to hinder your practice is conceit arise. I know about the practice. I know about the Buddha's teachings. I have lots of experiences about the practice. And when you practice with conceit, you can't improve. Because conceit hinders in your practice to not to improve, not to progress. And again, when you have conceit and when you believe yourself, you know very much. You don't listen to the teacher. You don't listen to your teacher because you believe yourself, you know everything. You know about the practice, you have lots of experiences, you know lots of things about the teachings of the Buddha. Sometimes you might believe even you know better than the teacher. So you don't think that you should listen, you should even listen to your teacher. So you won't listen to the teacher. At times you overtake the teacher, and if you do so, then again you will not improve in your practice. And again, when you believe yourself, when you believe you have so many experiences and knowledge, you keep analyzing. You keep analyzing yourself, or you might be comparing with texts or with the previous experiences and with this present experiences. How it is mentioned in the text, how you are experiencing, you keep comparing, you keep analyzing, you keep judging. You might be comparing with previous experiences also. Oh, last time I experienced like that, this time like this. Or maybe you keep expecting, oh, I experienced last time this and that, now I'm not yet, and so on. So many analyzation, so many judgment will be there. and you lack observing the presently arising object. Your duty is to observe the presently arising object, not to compare, not to analyze, not to judge. That is not your duty. And again, he or she might keep analyzing other yogis as well, because you believe you know better than the other yogis. So you might be analyzing other yogis. Oh, that yogi is not doing well, he or she is not practicing well, or he is doing that mistake, or she is doing that mistake, he or she should do this way, that way. So he or she keeps analyzing the other yogis when he or she believes that he or she has so many experiences and knowledges about the practice and the Dhamma. So that's why, in order to avoid all these things, a yogi must behave like an ignorant who knows nothing, or who knows very less about the practice and Dhamma. Again, if you behave like an ignorant, then again you are practicing respectfully. You are practicing respectfully. Again, under this topic, another thing can be mentioned, that is not just behaving like a ignorant, but behaving like a mute as well. Although you are capable to speak, you have to behave like a person who can't speak. That is to avoid unnecessary talking. That is to avoid unnecessary talking, unnecessary conversations. That is what we call as to keep noble silence. When you are in intensive retreat, you have to keep noble silence. And in this term, noble silence, it is not just mentioned as silence. Noble, the term noble is added. Why it is not just said as silence? At your home, at your daily life, at times you may have argument or conflict with your family members, with your friends. So when you have argument or conflict, or when you fight with them, sometimes you remain silent. You don't talk with them. So is that noble silence? Of course not. That is not the noble silence. That is just the silence. You are silent out of anger. You are silent at that time out of anger, so can't be called as noble silence. Even here, while you are doing sitting meditation, your eyes are closed, but if you keep indulging in the thinking, thoughts, fantasy, daydreaming, so that is again not a noble silence. That is again just a silence. So the meaning of noble, the noble is in Pali, it is Ariya. Arya is the Pali word for noble. Arya has two meanings. One is pure and the second is excellent. So purification is needed. While you are silent, your mind must be pure at that time. That is the meaning. Your mind must be pure, and to be pure, you have to keep observing the presently arising object. Then your mind is pure, then your mind is excellent, or then at that time you are highest. So excellence is needed. Excellence is needed, purification is needed. Then it is said to be noble silence. So it is not just about not talking, not communicating with other yogis. Of course, you have to avoid talking, communicating with other yogis, unless absolutely, unless the moment you absolutely need to talk. So when you absolutely need to talk, of course, you talk, we talk. Otherwise, we don't. We keep silence. We keep observing the presently arising object. So that is again practicing respectfully. So behaving like a mute, although you can speak. If you keep talking, that is quite distracted. Even when another fellow yogi come to talk to you, and if you respond, then he or she keeps coming to you again and again. So better not to respond. And there will be desire, there will be strong desire, keep arising to talk next time. If you talk once, then the desire arises. Mind will not be satisfied. It intends to talk again and again. But when you keep noble silence, there will not be that kind of intention. So have to keep noble silence. So under this topic, under this third point, behaving like a ignorant, it is also like behaving like a mute. Two things. Although you have lots of knowledge, you have to behave like ignorant. And although you can speak, you can talk, you have to behave like a mute. That is why whenever the old yogis are there in intensive retreat, we ask them to behave like a very new yogi, a new yogi, in order to behave himself and herself as an ignorant. A new yogi who is completely new for this practice, he don't keep thinking much about the practice, because he or she does not have any idea about the practice. He just listens, he or she just listens to the teacher. If a teacher asks him or her to do this one, he or she does. If a teacher asks him to avoid this or that, then he or she just avoid. So that kind of new yogi. to behave like that kind of new yogi. Although you have lots of experience and knowledge about the practice and Dhamma, that is again practicing respectfully. So there are still one more point to talk and more things to talk about practicing respectfully, but time is up. So we will continue tomorrow. So for today, in order to prevent the kilesas, in order to eliminate the kilesas that haven't arisen yet and that have already arisen, to prevent and to eliminate, we need very much care and respect into the practice. If you practice with care and respect, it is really helpful to improve in your meditation or to improve, to develop mindfulness and concentration, and again to sharpen mindfulness concentration. In fact, the feature that I am talking is the feature to improve in meditation. In text, it is mentioned as sharpening the controlling faculties, means improving in meditation. So this feature is very much required when you practice meditation. The first one, practicing respectfully. Definitely tomorrow we will continue with the second feature, that is practicing continuously with unbroken mindfulness. So for today, may all yogis be able to practice respectfully, and by practicing respectfully, may you be able to develop the mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom which haven't arisen yet, and may you be able to sharpen your mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom which have already arisen, and that means may you be able to improve fastly in your meditation.